Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, the state of Texas sends a bill banning all THC-infused hemp products to the governor's desk and sets off an industry firestorm caused by their prohibitionist Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's gloating news conference.
Right now, the Lieutenant Governor is holding a press conference and just spitting out lies like he always does.
Plus, thanks to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast, we've got an exclusive interview with Nevada Congresspersons Dina Titus on the status of the state's 2.0 Act that would regulate and legalize cannabis in America.
We're starting to realize that you got to eat this one bite at a time, and this would be a good way to do it. You're right. Republicans like to talk about states' rights, and that's what this does. And we recognize that states are so far ahead of the federal government that if we're not going to catch up, we at least need to get out of the way.
And more state battles with citizen-initiated ballot questions as democracy continues to erode across the nation. And now Nebraska looks to change the voters' will on medical cannabis. And a damning medical research study out of the University of California, San Francisco that ties chronic use of cannabis to vascular heart deterioration. Plus, this is the week of the annual Flower Expo trade show in Massachusetts, now with a new location in Northampton, one of the friendliest cities to cannabis in the Bay State. All that and state-by-state cannabis reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM-TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. So have you downloaded the new PCM-TV app yet? It's the freest and easiest way to gain access to our weekly news show, and you will find documentation of the last 4 years of this historic fight, plus the best of the past productions of other shows produced by pro-cannabis media over the years. First up this week, the state of Texas. A bill to ban THC-infused hemp passed both chambers of that state's Congress and is headed to the Governor Greg Abbott's desk to be signed into law, vetoed, or he can ignore it and it still becomes law. But needless to say, the over 8,000 businesses in Texas that legally sell hemp products are freaking out. That industry is responsible for generating over $6 billion in revenue, and thousands of people are employed in that side of the industry in that state. Those who took advantage of the loophole in the Farm Bill of 2018 to create this vibrant hemp industry are facing the end of their businesses and livelihoods. That Farm Bill defined hemp as having less than 0.3% of THC in dry weight. THC is an intoxicating cannabinoid in the plant that gets you high. So, what do you think happened? Well, many people and businesses figured out how to grow hemp and get it tested and approved as hemp, and then create a product called THCA that gets you high as soon as you heat it up or light it. But now many states are banning these products, which have been sold to underage young people and are available at gas stations, convenience stores, and smoke shops. And some states like Ohio are moving all of these products into licensed cannabis dispensaries, but others, like California, are banning them altogether. This week, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick held a news conference and showcased these products in front of the media. Patrick used, though, already debunked research studies on the impact of these products and lied about their makeup and impact. Needless to say, this was not well received by the existing hemp industry, including Lucas Gilkey of Hometown Hero Hemp in Austin.
Hey everybody, Lucas here with Hometown Hero. Right now, the Lieutenant Governor is holding a press conference and just spitting out lies like he always does. So he just held up one of our products, this exact product, and said it had 6,000 milligrams, which it does not. Lieutenant Governor also said that all the products that he had on that table are a variety of deltas, and he said Delta 10, Delta 6, a whole bunch of stuff. It is very clearly stated what this is: 20 milligrams Delta 9 THC and 20 milligrams CBD per piece. He said the ingredients, we don't know what's in it. All of the ingredients, every single ingredient are right there. All the nutrition panels. There's a COA per state law in Texas because this is a regulated product by the state of Texas per HB 1325, which Senator Perry passed. Again, this is a guy that has absolutely no clue what he is talking about. I'm embarrassed that we vote him into office. And please help us get rid of this guy next time he comes up for election. I'm tired of dealing with this.
With more on this story and the impact of this potential ban on these products, here's our hemp reporter, Kerry Hinkle from the Bayou City Hemp Company.
This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back again with my next hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So, this week, last week of May, has seen quite a lot of developments in our home state of Texas around SB3, the ban bill that has been making its way through the legislature for a few months now. If you haven't seen, on Wednesday of this week, the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, held a press conference that featured a lot of comical theatrics. He unveiled a bunch of THC snacks underneath a cloth and decided to throw one at a reporter and accused that if you take any of these products that your mind will be altered for the rest of your life. So Lieutenant Governor clearly has made his position well known on this Senate bill, and now that it has passed both the House and Senate, it now sits squarely on Governor Greg Abbott's desk. We as a company and the industry have honestly never been more united against SB3. This ban bill would impact hemp hearts, hemp seeds, and protein products. It would impact low-dose beverages like what we sell and a plethora of other products that veterans, mothers, grandmothers, and all consumers throughout Texas rely upon. So we are now in a strong veto campaign urging Governor Abbott to veto the bill. You will see on Monday that there will be a press conference in the Capitol that will feature a lot of people that are being impacted by this potential ban bill, which will be headlined by some important people in the veteran community. So, and even if Governor Greg Abbott does decide to ban our products, killing the industry and ruining thousands, if not millions, of lives in Texas, there are other legal options to pursue. We have lawsuits, injunctions, etc. So there is going to be a fight in the freedom state of Texas to continue to allow consumers to have these products. So it has been quite tumultuous, but we are living to fight another day. And if you would, you can go to hempsupporter.com/stateaction/Texas, and that is where you will find an email campaign that allows you to contact the governor in a matter of seconds, urging him to veto that bill. So we will live to fight another day, and I'm sure I will be back next week to provide more updates on this very important bill in the biggest hemp state in the country. Again, I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and this was my hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In reaction to this news conference and potential ban on THC hemp products, the Texas Commissioner on Agriculture, Sid Miller, issued the following statement that is being viewed by the hemp industry as even more confusing. Miller said, "Texas farmers are worried about the effects of Senate Bill 3 on the hemp industry. This legislation does not ban growing hemp or planting hemp for biomass. It's a targeted effort to crack down on abuse of THC in the retail sector, not a ban on legitimate hemp farming." The end of that quote. One more note, though, from the state of Texas this week. The city of Denton was one of the 7 localities in that state that decriminalized cannabis possession through the ballot box in 2022. But this week, the city council, in a 4-3 vote, changed that citizen-led initiative and repealed the decriminalization ordinance. Another example, though, of how states continue to overrule basic tenets of democracy. Fortunately, in Michigan, citizen-led initiatives at least get some respect for their opinions and advocacy for the cause. One of the champions in that state who is always actively involved in state policy is our own correspondent, Amie Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing. Here's Amie.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm reporting from the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan, and there are a few things going on here that you should know about. One is that lawmakers are eagerly pushing through a bill to add roadside saliva testing for DUIs. There are already 2 established laws in the state that create a conflict, especially for medical patients. One is the internal possession law that was established under the Medical Marijuana Act of 2008 and the MRTMA of 2018. Here's the problem. Cannabis stays in our bodies for 30 days after use. For those who need plant medicine, this is almost impossible. Proving impairment with cannabis in your system continues to be a challenge that many states are struggling with. Rather than continuing to study and research more accurate ways to gauge impairment while under the influence, there is no need to fast track this bill until a more accurate measurement procedure is discovered. If you look at the details of this proposed law, It seems to benefit testing labs more than protecting the public. Plus, it puts undue responsibility on police. Michigan Weedsters urges you to reach out to your lawmakers and let your voice be heard. Next up, the decline in cannabis sales. During the first 3 months of the year, sales have decreased by $30 million. Well, that might sound significant. The best part of the decline is that thanks to oversupply, Michiganders might be spending less money, but they are still buying more products than ever. On a higher note, mark your calendars for Hazy Hole's Cannabis Classic on June 9th at the Orchard Hills Country Club in Buchanan, Michigan. You don't have to be a golfer to join in on the fun. It's going to be a blast. Come swing with the cannabis community at Michigan's premier legacy golf event. Whether you are just playing or vibing, there's something for everyone. Hole sponsorships, put your brand on the map. Sign up to golf, compete, connect, and blaze the trail. General admission, kick back, walk the greens, and enjoy vendors, music, and food and fun. That's it for this week. I'm Amie Carter, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C. this week, Terrence Cole was confirmed as DEA administrator by the Senate Judiciary Committee by a partisan 12-10 vote. His fate now moves onto the floor of the Senate. Also this week, the DEA released a report called the 2025 National Drug Threat Assessment. In that report, the DEA claims that Chinese and Mexican drug cartels are operating inside legal cannabis states from Maine to Oklahoma. Plus, don't be surprised to see more prohibitionist and scare tactics from the DEA under the leadership of Terrence Cole. Here's more from Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A federal appeals court has dealt a major blow to the cannabis industry's legal strategy, rejecting a high-profile lawsuit that sought to overturn cannabis's federal prohibition on constitutional grounds. The U.S. Circuit Court of the First Circuit affirmed a lower court's dismissal of the case brought by several state-licensed cannabis companies, including multi-state operator Verano Holdings and Massachusetts-based business Canna Provisions. Now, these companies and others argued that Congress had essentially abandoned cannabis prohibition by allowing state legal markets to operate and preventing federal interference through budget riders. They also claimed that this selective enforcement made the federal ban unconstitutional. But Chief Judge David Barron, writing for the three-judge panel, firmly rejected that reasoning, citing that the court ruled that businesses have no fundamental right to cultivate or sell cannabis regardless of the government's hands-off approach in legalized states. The lawsuit was represented by prominent attorney David Boies, whose past clients do include the Justice Department and former Vice President Al Gore. At oral arguments, Boies argued that Congress can only regulate in-state commercial activity if failing to do so would substantially interfere with interstate commerce regulation. However, judges remained unpersuaded, noting that the Controlled Substances Act remains fully intact for regulating commercial cannabis activity for non-medical purposes. The district court had previously found that companies had legal standing to bring to the lawsuit, acknowledging they face real economic injuries from federal prohibition. But both courts ultimately sided with the governor's position that the challenge failed to state a valid constitutional claim. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One more story out of Washington, D.C. Over the past few weeks, lobbyists have been flooding the nation's capital, working to make federal cannabis reform more of a priority for the Republican-controlled government. In the next episode of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast, Executive Director of the NCIA, Aaron Smith, joins PCMTV founder Jimmy Young for an interview with Congressperson Dina Titus from Nevada. She happens to be one of the co-sponsors of the States Act 2.0 that was introduced at the House of Representatives a few weeks ago, and she shared an update on that effort to legalize and regulate that plant nationally.
Are we seeing enthusiastic support as we have with other legislation in the past?
Well, I think you will. I mean, it doesn't go as far as a lot of Democrats would like to see. You know, they'd like to see it totally deregulated, if that's the right term, or descheduled rather. But we're starting to realize that you got to eat this one bite at a time, and this would be a good way to do it. You're right. Republicans like to talk about states' rights, and that's what this does. And we recognize that states are so far ahead of the federal government that if we're not going to catch up, we at least need to get out of the way. And I think that's a message that this bill sends.
A lot of people say, well, it's a Democrat bill, so we're not going to talk about that because we're Republicans. Oh, Republicans, we're not going to talk about to them because they're the other side. How can the two parties come together, and is this plant able to bring it together?
Well, you're so right that things seldom are based on facts, and they often get caught up in politics. And that I'm not going to vote for this bill because it might help my opponent, or it might help the Democrats get a majority, or whatever the reason might be. Or I'm going to trade it for my vote for something else. That's log rolling. So there are all the political problems that go with any kind of legislation. But if it's bipartisan, that's important. If it's not too ideological, that's important. Getting the administration support seems to be important with Republicans during this administration, because as you saw on the budget bill, there were these kind of blowhards and Chip Roy and all these, we're not going to vote for it. We don't like it. It's a bad bill. Get the phone call from the White House. They're right in line. Now, we were optimistic about Donald Trump, who had made some comments in Florida that he was going to be supportive. Now, we've seen that kind of stall, and we have this crazy Secretary of Health and Human Services that I think is on drugs. I don't know where he's coming from. And so it's hard to read what the administration is going to do, and if they're going to make it a priority, and if they're going to weigh in. So that's another element of the politics that we have to keep in mind. But you have to look for ways to attach something to something else that people want, or say, well, I can support your dairy farm bill if you can support my marijuana bill. And just the fact that y'all were there on the Hill, that's very impressive, having somebody eye to eye talk about it, and for members of Congress to see you're normal people. The old stigma for marijuana and a gateway drug and head shops and glow lights and Che Guevara and all of that, that's just not accurate. When I first started visiting some of the marijuana facilities before it became legal in Nevada and California and Colorado, you see what operations they are. You've got agronomists, you've got chefs, you've got chemists, it's a very professional operation. So your educating members is as important as you're advocating with members. And I think that works.
The full episode of that interview will be released on Wednesday of this week on the WPCM TV network of distribution platforms and wherever you get your podcasts. Next up, we welcome a new member of the Cannabis Coast to Coast news team. It's Louis Joe. He is a licensed delivery operator in the District of Columbia and someone who advocates for the injustices in that market. Here's Louis.
I'm Louis Joe, and this is Coast to Coast Cannabis News. We're bringing you this story straight from the people making it happen. Firsthand, from the movers and shakers and business owners navigating DC's shifting cannabis industry. This week, we take a deep dive into the rapidly changing market, where operators are adjusting to the new medical cannabis system. For years, cannabis in the district existed in a legal gray area under Initiative 71. Initiative 71, or I-71, allowed possession and gifting, but not sales. This meant you could enter a store and purchase a non-cannabis product or service and receive a cannabis product as a gift with your purchase. Now, dispensaries are rushing to transition into the medical cannabis space. And if you think it's just about switching a sign from gifts to sales, well, think again. Business owners have had to overhaul their entire operations, from licensing to compliance to getting their storefronts patient ready. Some pulled it off early and they had record sales. And others barely had a time to set up shop before the deadline on March 31st, and they took a financial hit instead. One dispensary owner summed it up well. They said, 420 wasn't as busy as the I-71 days, but I think we're definitely finding our footing. And that transition is what's fueling the shift. April wasn't just strong because of the holiday. It was the first time many patients truly understood the change and started engaging with the new system. DC saw a record of about 19,000 new patients in the month of April, with dispensaries generating $5.46 million, the highest monthly total since 2013 when the program started. Of course, the road ahead isn't exactly paved in green. Advocates say the medical cannabis market will bring structure, safety, and tax benefits. But the growing pains are real. The big question now, whether businesses can keep up with the patient demand, adapt to tighter regulations, and still thrive. It's a new era in cannabis in DC, and we'll be right here through all the twists and the turns from our nation's capital. I'm Louis Joe with Coast to Coast Cannabis News. All facts, no smoke.
That'll do it for the A Block, our first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Next, we will check on the international efforts to end cannabis prohibition and an update on the plight of American professional basketball player Jared Shaw, who was arrested for possession of cannabis edibles in Indonesia 3 weeks ago. Indonesia has some of the most strict prohibitionist laws where Shaw could be facing a lifetime and perhaps even death by firing squad. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
We see a lot of companies out there that they don't do budgeting, they don't do forecasting, they don't do any strategic business development or strategic business thinking about what direction they want their company to go. They believe that being in cannabis is just going to automatically be a moneymaker, and they don't plan for things like 3 or 4 years after a state comes online. There's usually a decrease in the profitability of each company because the state gets saturated or gets to the saturation point. If you're not planning for that, you're going to be in trouble when that happens. And that's why we see a lot of cannabis companies go out of business or merge or get sold at that point in time.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. One of the reasons why we have introduced a segment for international news is that cannabis prohibition is fast becoming an issue in many other countries, and the worldwide prohibition continues to erode. In some countries like Indonesia, the laws are draconian. That means harsh or severe. We've got another definition: unjust, unfair, and ridiculous. 3 weeks ago, a 34-year-old American professional basketball player named Jared Shaw was busted for 134 cannabis edibles that were sent to his apartment from Thailand. He was arrested for possession and distribution and is now facing the reality that he could be sentenced to life in prison and even paraded before a firing squad to be shot. If you remember the saga of former Olympian Brittany Griner, she was arrested in a Russian airport over a year ago and was sent to prison in that country, where she spent almost 10 months before the U.S. government was able to get her freed through a prisoner exchange. The chances that the U.S. government will get involved with Texas native Jared Shaw are minimal at best. There's even a report now that English tourists are going to Thailand in order to smuggle out cannabis from that country. So now you have to wonder if you think that maybe someone was trying to set up this basketball professional by shipping him the edibles from Thailand. Unfortunately, in Indonesia, you are considered guilty and have to prove your innocence, unlike here in the US, where the opposite is true. So the future does not look too hopeful for him. To make matters even more dire, there isn't, or hasn't rather, even been one follow-up to the story in the media over the past few weeks since his arrest. Shaw was made an example of when he was paraded before the media before being escorted off to prison. And in England this week, the London Drug Commission announced 42 recommendations for federal reform covering education, healthcare, and law enforcement. The report did not call for legalization, but does recommend that cannabis be removed from the Misuse of Drugs Act and added to their Psychoactive Substances Act, which means that cannabis possession for personal use would not be a criminal act. That alone is a major step towards reform for that country, and the London mayor is already embracing that change. In the meantime, there was a huge bust in Portugal, and Ben Stevens has that story in his European report.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's European report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Portuguese police have launched a major crackdown on an international criminal gang accused of exploiting loopholes in the country's medical cannabis laws to illegally export millions of pounds worth of product. Earlier this week, authorities carried out 64 raids across mainland Portugal, the island of Madeira, as part of Operation Evredanina. The investigation, which began in 2022, has so far led to the seizure of 7.3 tonnes of cannabis, over 400,000 euros in cash, 12 vehicles, 11 firearms, and the arrest of 5 individuals. The Portuguese judicial police, working closely with their Spanish counterparts, say the gang purchased licensed pharmaceutical companies and created wholesale cannabis businesses as a front, then used false documents to traffic thousands of kilos of cannabis to illicit markets. Raids were also conducted beyond Portugal, with 6 taking place in Spain, 1 in Bulgaria and 1 in Cyprus. Portugal is the world's second largest cultivator of cannabis after Canada. Dozens of licensed operators grow, manufacture and distribute cannabis products legally, and many are now voicing their concern over the potential damage this could do to the sector's credibility. Curaleaf International, which has a large presence in the country, welcomed the enforcement action. Its head, Juan Martinez, said the operation helps protect responsible operators and preserve the credibility of the sector, adding that their facilities were not searched and continue to meet all regulatory standards. Portugal's National Medicines Authority, Infarmed, has yet to comment, but with investigations ongoing and more arrests suspected, the industry is bracing for further fallout. That's all from me this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast report. What we have in Ontario this week are 2 farm gates located in Kingston, Ontario. Kingston Cannabis and Level Up Infusions are now offering their clones for sale. This is something that is going to be great for many of the micro cultivars that are going to be growing and wanting to be able to have not only their strains that are preference, but are also grown in an LP, which is also going to be great. With this is going to be something for many of our provinces to be able to look into, and hopefully soon enough, most of them, if not all, will be able to put this into effect and also be able to provide clones to many others, hopefully consumers as well. Next we have is a hash recall in Quebec, which is due to their packaging. This packaging to Health Canada was something that they found easily able to be opened by very, very, very young adults, so children. With this being recalled, this just means that they have to now diligently create a new sort of packaging that is not only going to be safe for children, but is now going to be under the regulations. May 27th to 28th, we had the Grow Up Conference here in Toronto, Ontario. It was not only a great way for many of us Ontarians to be able to connect, reconnect, and to start new connections, but it was also an amazing experience to be able to, not only for the bud tenders for the first time to be able to attend a conference, but to also obtain samples, which is something that most bud tenders or people that do have their can sell are able to benefit from. So, as for Canada, this is Debi Facey, your Canadian correspondent, with the Coast to Coast news of the week. Peace.
Now let's turn back to the U.S. and talk about the race to become the 25th state to pass adult use legalization. The state of Pennsylvania, and their first attempt was to propose a state-run effort, but that got defeated in a Senate committee 2 weeks ago. And now State Senator Marty Flynn, a Democrat from Scranton, shared a proposal for adult use that establishes a regulatory framework for cultivation, distribution, and legal retail sales for adults to use. It's called the Keystone Cannabis Act, and he hopes to introduce it when his fellow legislators return to work after their holiday break. Flynn is circulating his intent to file that bill in a memo that said adults should be free to make their own decisions about cannabis use, just as they do with alcohol and tobacco, without unnecessary government interference, end quote. Now, let's get to Virginia to check in with Joe Parsons on the efforts for reform in that state.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. With bipartisan efforts, the Commonwealth has decided to bring back the Virginia Cannabis Commission. The newly reformed commission is made up of 10 legislative members, 6 from the House of Delegates, and 4 members from the Senate, with a mission to help shape current and future cannabis policy in Virginia. The good news is that Virginia's very own Chelsea Higgs Wise from the Richmond-based Marijuana Justice will be working hand in hand with the lawmakers to make sure the system stays rooted in equity, transparency, and repair to those most affected by the failed war on drugs. While she will not have a formal seat on the commission, she will work directly with lawmakers, as she's done before, to help shape the past cannabis bills that have been vetoed over the last 2 years. We wish her all the best and continued success. Speaking of great organizations that support justice and reform, I was able to catch up with Lonnie Hayes III, the director of the Virginia chapter for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, on Coffee Talk. It was a great show, and it was great to have him on. So, here's a little more from him on why M4MM is so important.
It's an important organization because an industry is about to emerge that is going to leave a group of people behind, and this industry will bring in a substantial amount of money that the taxes from it, when we get a bill passed with provisions to have 70% of all the tax revenue go to underserved communities, can improve communities. That's why it's so important.
Be sure to follow both of these great organizations to ensure justice for everyone in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You can always follow Marijuana Justice at THC Justice Now and M4MM at minoritiesformedicalmarijuana.org. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville. And as always, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
In Washington state, cannabis officials there announced that the state will start to accept new social equity retail applications starting this month. The state plans on giving out 52 new licenses, which will be the largest distribution of licenses in Washington since legalization passed over 10 years ago. With more from that state, here is Matthew Friedlander, who is actively involved with policy there.
I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, reporting from Leaf Bowl for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So, like I said, I'm down here at the 2025 Northwest Leaf Bowl. Skagit Organics just picked up an award for Best Capsules. Pretty excited about that. This is a good reminder that the cannabis industry is still alive and well, and the cannabis community is still out here having fun. It's not just all hard work and no fun, so we are enjoying ourselves. A couple things have happened this week, though, here in Washington. On the cannabis side, social equity licenses opened up again. So there is a new round of licensing that's happened here in Washington State for social equity retail licenses. Also, an important thing to note about this event is that this is the first event in Washington that has on-site cannabis sales. So the Puyallup tribe operates commencement-based cannabis and they are hosting the Northwest Leaf Bowl on their property this year. And the tribal entities here in Washington have, a little bit of that's what's going on. The ability to do things their own way. So they are pushing the envelope here with the first on-site cannabis sales in Washington State. Pretty excited to be at this event. So that's what I've got for you this week out of Washington, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
There are a number of states who are trying to block citizen initiatives to get questions on ballots for elections. Traditionally, the tactic of the ballot question has been a reason to drive more people to the polls to vote. Cannabis questions tend to be the catalyst for many people to exercise their voting rights and traditionally has a positive impact on voter turnout. However, there is a problem that has arisen in places like Colorado, Texas, Florida, and now Nebraska. That problem is that the already elected officials in those states don't like the results. They especially have a disdain for some of these ballot initiatives that involve cannabis for medical purposes or adult use. And now you can add the state of Oklahoma to the list of states who want to make sure their legislatures are the only ones to initiate any kind of reform, not the people. And this is a blatant attack on one of the basics of any democracy, that citizens can make changes to laws that are unjust or just not fair. Here's Kimmie Cannabis with more from Oklahoma.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Big developments are unfolding in Oklahoma's cannabis scene. Governor Kevin Stitt has just signed a controversial new law tightening restrictions on ballot initiatives. We're talking limits on how many petition signatures can come from one county and stricter requirements for language approval before anything reaches the ballot. But don't count the activist out just yet. Oklahomans for Responsible Cannabis Action, also known as ORCA, are pushing forward with their 2026 adult use legalization campaign. They're hoping they beat the deadline, filing their petition just before the new law went into effect. If so, the new restrictions may not apply to their initiative, and that could keep their path to legalization wide open. Meanwhile, over at the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, House Bill 2807 is officially rolling out. Starting June 1st, all medical marijuana flower products must be sold in pre-packaged form. No more deli-style buds behind the counter. Dispensaries have until November 1st to sell off current inventory. And in a move to help streamline the supply chain, licensed transporters can now store products in designated warehouses. So while the landscape is shifting fast, Oklahoma's cannabis community isn't backing down. It's adapting, pushing forward, and staying in the fight. That's it for Oklahoma's Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
On the West Coast, there's a few stories to share. One in California is about a major bust of illegal cannabis operations. In a multi-agency operation in the Central Valley, Governor Newsom's office reports that the task force seized over 100,000 plants, just over 22,000 pounds of processed cannabis with an estimated value over $123 million. It was the largest bust for a California state task force dedicated to stopping the illegal cannabis operations that continue to flourish in that state. Our Oregon correspondent, Marianne Cursetjee, has been busy on the East Coast over the past few weeks as she works on getting her Alibi products into the New York market. In fact, she was featured in an MJ Biz Daily article. This week, she submits a special one on one special report with an interview with an Entourage cannabis operator, Tucker Holland, who is another success story in her state of Oregon. So here's Marianne with that.
This is a Cannabis Coast to Coast news special one-on-one. I'm Marianne with Alibi with Tucker Holland from Entourage Cannabis. Thanks so much for joining us, Tucker. You guys,
awesome. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Marianne.
Yeah, you guys just cleaned up at the Oregon Leaf Bowl. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, what a great surprise. When we enter things in the competition, it really is. It's we pull it straight off our manufacturing line. Managers vote on the products that we feel like is just best in the shop at that time, and those are what gets entered. And so There's always an expectation from our people that we're going to win something. That's just the level of standards that we have. And so we're always expecting something, but to walk away with 5 is quite the surprise, quite the honor. But I think it's definitely a testament to honestly the farms that we work with, like Alibi, but also the high attention to detail that our staff has when making these products. And so it's definitely rewarding for them to see that their hard work really pays off.
That's pretty awesome. So, we're both operators in Oregon, and we know that the Oregon market is really tough and really crowded. So what enables you guys to stand out in the market and continue on your path of excellence?
Great question. I think it's definitely understanding what our values are and then sticking to those. And so really, as we've kind of grown and really blossom into our identity as a company, it's a company for the everyday smoker. And we're a company of smokers, of consumers that are making products for consumers. And so really when we identify, we don't want to make a product that we're not going to smoke or use ourselves. And so we've really set the bar high, in some cases higher than even what the state mandates when it comes to testing and stuff like that. But we're going to, when we set those standards, we set those values of quality, of protecting cannabis, of making sure that we have no pesticides, no heavy metals, nothing at all in our products. I think that's really been the driving force for our brand.
That's amazing. So what are your plans for the rest of this year or the future?
The rest of this year is definitely trying to solidify kind of our position that we've had. We're definitely looking very closely at edibles. So looking at possibly coming out with those edibles, the gummies probably would be the first thing. Definitely looking at where we can do that. Kitchen space is limited where we're at. We're definitely bursting at the seams. So trying to find the area that we can do it at. And that's really the next goals. But we're also we've about last year we released our rosin vape cart, and but now we're a month away of releasing our rosin dabbables, which we're very excited about. We kind of got the market prepped with the vapes. And everyone's been asking for the dabbables, where the dabbables at. So we're going to be launching those within a month. And so we're very excited about that as well.
That'll do it for the B block, but we have another full section coming up, including more state reports and PCM TV's Jimmy Young talks with our new Alabama correspondent, Jennifer Boozer. Her dispensary, Sweet Home Cannabama, is taking a hit from the lack of direction in her state, as more delays continue to stall the rollout of their medical program that was approved 4 years ago and has been tied up with litigation. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
The biggest thing that's happened is this week, my personal and radio, Facebook, and Instagram pages have been completely banned.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. So this is the final section of this week's show and our last reminder to download the PCM TV app. It is free and available at Google Play or the App Store. Now back to our state reports. We start in Illinois with the Chicago Clone Guy.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting from just outside of Chicago, Illinois for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in. Lots going on as always here in Chicagoland. I'm going to focus all on one new state House bill that just actually was passed through committee last Friday. Lots going on with it. First part of it would allow medical patients to purchase discounted product from any dispensary. Currently, there's only a small percentage of dispensaries in Illinois that medical patients are allowed to, or actually will get a discount from. So this provision would allow medical patients like myself to get discounts at every dispensary. So that's pretty cool. Another facet of this House bill would allow craft growers to expand their canopy space much faster than normally. Currently, they're allowed to go 5,000 square foot, then it goes up after they prove themselves and, prove to the state that they're good boys and girls and following the rules and the laws. But this provision would allow them just to go up to that 14,000 square foot canopy space immediately, which would be great for them to hopefully make more money and be more competitive. Another facet of this bill would exclude arbitrary rules that pretty much hold people back from getting jobs in the cannabis industry. Actually, pretty much it eliminates the fact that if you have a criminal record, sometimes those criminal records would stop you from getting a job in the cannabis industry or would stop you from getting a permit for a hemp permit, a cannabis license. So long story short, this provision would stop the state from excluding people with criminal records from entering the market, from working. So that's pretty cool. Woo, I'm gonna keep going on this bill. There's another part of this too, which would be a hardship exemption for craft growers and infusers only, which I don't understand. So this would be a hardship exception for craft growers and infusers only. Simply put, there are a ton, like almost 100 craft growers and infusers in the state that are permitted to grow and to operate, but they're not up and running because the state won't let them up and run. The state literally is holding them back from up and running, but in the meantime, these people are still paying the licensing fees, the mortgage, but mainly it's the licensing fees that you would need to operate. So these infusers and growers are paying for licensing fees that they're not even allowed to sell yet because the state won't let them open up yet. But this would eliminate that and help them out. But anyways, that is the news for Chicago and Illinois. I am the Chicago Clone Guy reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in.
My name is Xavier Jaillet. I'm the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and a cannabis attorney at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And here's what's happening in Colorado cannabis news this week. First, a judge has blocked and dismissed Mammoth Farms' lawsuit, which was reported on a few weeks back against the MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, for allegedly allowing the inversion, which was essentially defined as conversion of legal hemp products or federally legal hemp products into the state's marijuana market. Now, Colorado, of course, does not allow hemp products to be sold in normal retailers, and very limited amounts of hemp products are allowed to be sold in dispensaries. And so the judge dismissed Mammoth Farms' suit because the judge decided that Mammoth Farms did not pursue and exhaust the available administrative remedies to it under statutory law. Mammoth Farms has indicated that they do plan to appeal the decision, and so the lawsuit likely will remain an ongoing concern. Now, the second story I have to report for you all this week is on an effort by hemp product brands and companies to overturn, repeal, and perhaps reform Colorado's approach to intoxicating hemp products. Now, like I just mentioned, Colorado does not generally allow the sale or distribution of intoxicating hemp products in the state. And a certain group of brands and lobbyists are looking to draft a potential new bill that would allow for certain types of products. Of particular note is THC beverages that are derived from hemp to be able to be sold in Colorado liquor stores, much like the original intent of Colorado's recreational legalization bill, which was to regulate marijuana like alcohol. That's it for the Colorado Cannabis News Update this week. My name is Xavier Jaillet, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Next up is Alabama, where the governor there continues to make it as difficult as possible for the industry to launch after 4 years of delays and litigation. That's not all. However, as our Alabama correspondent Jennifer Boozer had her social media accounts taken down this week by Facebook and Instagram, something that is far too common in the cannabis industry. Here's PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, who talked with Jennifer last week and is appearing as a guest on her podcast on Monday night. Here's Jimmy.
Thanks, Alaina. Joining us now is our new Alabama correspondent. Her name is Jennifer Boozer. She is the host of Sweet Home Cannabama, which also happens to be her CBD store in Alabama. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. And what a week it's been for you. Can you give us a quick synopsis?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. The biggest thing that's happened is this week, my personal and radio Facebook and Instagram pages have been completely banned. 17 years of posting my kids' whole lives, my journey, building my business, my radio program, all of my advocacy work, all of the cannabis and hemp education, all of it is gone. There was no explanation. I just don't exist anymore. And every bit of the work and everything I'm connected to, I am disappeared. And, you know, I'm not exactly a conspiracy theorist. Yes, I am. I'm certain someone is behind this.
Well, you know, I don't want to get into who that might be because...
No, well, I mean, there's a whole long list.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Down in Alabama.
But the thing that really bothers me, and you're not the only one I've heard this from in the industry, as you know, is the fact that they give you no warning, no explanation. They just pull the plug. And I can be perfectly honest with you, Jennifer. I will never pull the plug on anything that you share with us because I respect.
Well, thank you. I mean, you know,
I am most concerned, however, now about your business. What impact will the latest moves in the legislature have on your business, and are you concerned about that?
Well, absolutely. We did just get word finally. The ABC board has had about 3 weeks with this bill since it passed. And no one has been able to tell the businesses even when this enforcement will go into effect. The bill has 2 different dates in it. One is July 1st and one is January 1st. And so we haven't known, do we have 6 weeks or do we have 6 months to try to sell what we can and do what we can to pivot? I mean, 6 weeks is, you know, that's no time. I don't even know how to sell my inventory that fast. And then a lot of stores are selling out and not reordering because they don't know. So there's lost revenue. Another problem that we're having is that I think a lot of people in Alabama don't understand how the legislative process works. And a lot of them, because we have been loud about how this will create a Class C felony for possession or selling. And we wanted people to know the bad parts of the bill that will affect them as consumers as well. But now they're afraid because they don't understand it's not immediately in effect. So our sales are down. I can't even advertise or promote on social media now. So my business in particular is going to suffer. My radio show, we live stream it from social media as well. It's a lot of confusion, but the ABC board did tell us today that January 1st is the date that we have to worry about going to jail.
That's nice of them to share that with you.
Right?
Jennifer, I cannot imagine the ups and downs. I don't think the regular person understands the
No.
peaks and valleys that are inherent in being in this industry. And it just, again, we'd like to share these stories because we have to, and you will never be censored from the WPCM TV network or Pro Cannabis Media Production Group. It'll never happen. Jennifer Boozer, thank you so much for joining us, and hang in there. And just don't forget that you have a lot of people who are still pulling for you. So
Thank you.
use that to help you be strong.
In Nevada this week, legislators moved forward with a bill that will wipe out past cannabis convictions in order for people who want to become foster parents. Those convictions were a red flag in that process, and if this bill passes, it will remove that obstacle. Plus, the Indigenous Cannabis Trade Association is releasing a map of all the Native Americans' cannabis operations around the country. Here's Dina Tasaka with those stories and more.
I'm Dina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A major bust in Las Vegas near Alexander and Tenaya seized 800 pounds of illegal marijuana, highlighting Nevada's persistent black market despite cannabis legalization. The State Cannabis Compliance Board estimates a third of cannabis sales happen illegally, risking health and untested products and targeting minors online. Tourists, who make up 63% of sales, often unknowingly buy from illicit vendors, especially since there are no dispensaries on the Strip. Officials stress buying only from licensed dispensaries for safety and compliance. The article from Mercury News, titled "Native American Tribes Find Economic Power in Alcohol, Cannabis, and More," highlights how tribal nations across the U.S. are leveraging industries like cannabis and alcohol to bolster economic sovereignty and self-sufficiency. In Minnesota, tribes like Red Lake Nation and White Earth Nation and Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe have opened tribally owned cannabis dispensaries ahead of the state's full licensing rollout, aiming to secure an early market advantage projected to reach $1.76 billion by 2029. My own personal experiences just last week spotlights the Red Falcon Consumption Lounge and Dispensary in Indio, California, with the 29 Palms Band of Mission Indians, where visitors enjoy great food, a sesh, sports bar-like atmosphere, and the tribe makes their own IPAs. In the San Diego area, the Sequan Tribe's Sessions by the Bay Lounge is thriving since opening on 420 weekend, offering an immersive experience. Beyond cannabis, tribes are investing in alcohol sales, gaming, and tourism, often reinvesting profits into critical services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Despite challenges like regulatory hurdles and social concerns, these efforts empower tribes with economic diversification and cultural resilience. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Dina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Ohio, lawmakers there are continuing to tweak the existing adult use laws in order to get more control over that market. Christina Brisson is our correspondent in that state, and she's got a report on how that state has increased the daily amount sold to one person up to 2.5 ounces from the original amount of 1 ounce. Here's Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Update with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week's update has to do with all the bill fun that continues here in Ohio. They've now decided to blend SB 56, SB 86, and HB 160 into one bill. HB 198, however, will remain separate as it's about hemp versus cannabis, but they've decided to put all three other bills together and try to hide all the changes they're trying to make underneath. Most of it has to do with the legality and prosecution versus the member plants you're going to grow the THC percentages. SB 56 will take the header of this bill, but it's going to consume all the other dictations underneath it. However, we're not sure this is anything that we want here in Ohio. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Over the past 6 months, there has been a noticeable increase in research studies on the effects cannabis has on humans. One is especially concerning if you are a regular consumer of cannabis by smoking the plant medicine or ingesting edibles. This week, the University of California in San Francisco released the results of a study of 55 regular consumers between 2021 and 2024. Many of these participants in the study had been chronic users of 10 years or more and never used nicotine. The report was published this past week in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The conclusion was that using cannabis led to reduced blood vessel function that was comparable to tobacco cigarette users. It's called vascular function, and those who had been chronic users had reduced vascular function than those who hadn't used it. The bottom line, the researchers concluded that cannabis is bad for your heart function. But again, the study was limited to just 55 participants. And on the other side of cannabis research is a data study that finds, quote, compelling evidence that CBD offers a comprehensive treatment for Alzheimer's disease. The report was released in Madrid, Spain, and published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. Now let's check in on what's going on in the state of Massachusetts, where state politicians continue to review the operations of the Cannabis Control Commission, and there may be some major changes for this troubled regulatory group. Here's Curtis Emery with the Bay State Cannabis Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Big news for Mass Cannabis, as the State House is looking at a bill right now which will increase the retail license cap from 3 to 6, as well as a stipulation which will allow for businesses to own 35% in an unlimited amount of additional businesses. This bill, however, does not increase the amount of licenses a company can hold for cultivation and manufacturing. Cannabis advocates argue that such steps favor multi-state operators and big cannabis while effectively boxing out small, local, and equity-owned dispensaries. Also in mass legal news, a lawsuit filed by the Verano Holdings Corporation and Massachusetts cannabis businesses Cannaplanners and Wiseacre Farms has been rejected by U.S. Appeals Court. This lawsuit was hoping to decriminalize marijuana on the federal level. Also news in Massachusetts, multi-state operator Forefront Ventures has announced voluntary receivership. The company claims that selling the business will be a last resort, and they hope the litigation will create some value for their assets as they slim down moving forward. Forefront Ventures owns the Massachusetts dispensary brand Mission Cannabis. Ivan Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Next up is a report on one of the most popular trade shows in cannabis in Massachusetts. It's called the Flower Expo. This year, it's moving from their original home in Greenfield to a new location in one of the most active cannabis markets in the state, Northampton. There are 14 vibrant dispensaries in a city that sells more cannabis per capita than any other city in the Bay State. It's also the city that was the first to waive the controversial community impact fee of 3% tariff, giving a break to all the small businesses in the cannabis space in that city. PCM TV founder Jimmy Young will be on hand at the Flower Expo on Wednesday with a live report and a remote on location. Here he talks with Jason Bello, the organizer of event, about what to expect this week.
Thanks, Alaina. I'm so excited to have Jason Bello on with us here in our weekly Cannabis Coast to Coast news show, because I'll be joining the Flower Expo gang in Northampton, Massachusetts, Wednesday and Thursday this week. And the Flower Expo is, as Jason calls it, the premier B2B cannabis event every year. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. And again, thank you for allowing me to come in and do my thing on location.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy. Always a pleasure to speak with you. And we're incredibly excited about the event this year in Northampton. Obviously, we had 2 incredible years proving the concept of the show, which has now become a beloved event amongst, Massachusetts brands and retailers, but really solidifying, our status as the preeminent cannabis B2B trade show in the state, and we've got a lot of things to look forward to in Northampton this year.
And I got to ask the question, you were in Greenfield for 2 years. It was a great time. Everybody loved being there, indoor, outdoor. Hopefully it won't have those cloudbursts that have been part of it for the last a couple of years there. It's not going to rain. It's going to be 2 beautiful summer days. Why go to Northampton? What was it about Northampton that appealed?
Yeah, well, I don't want to cause any kind of hurras, but it is looking pretty good on the weather app, Jimmy. So fingers crossed. But I would say two focal things. I mean, number one is local infrastructure. Northampton has a lot of hotel rooms, which is good. People don't need to commute to the show. There's restaurants, there's bars, and then really secondly, it's the venue itself. We're very fortunate that we were able to get the 3-county fairgrounds by way actually of an exclusive deal with the city. We're the only cannabis event allowed in the town. But the venue is incredible. It has, a couple of spacious indoor buildings that we're going to utilize, and I think it'll really, increase the professionalness of the event, the comfort level, and let people focus on what they're there to do, and that's get business deals done.
That's right. And I know you take a lot of pride in the fact that you've got hundreds of dispensary people, bud tenders. There's going to be a lot of decision makers in the cannabis business industry on hand to take part in your event, right?
Definitely. That's what the entire show is about. Our motto is brands meet buyers. I have over 330 dispensaries that are attending. On day one, that's going to be all at the buyer level. And on day two, those buyers plus bud tenders will be coming out. The focus of the exhibitors is really cannabis. So there's not a lot of ancillary brands there. It mostly is, just the top cannabis brands in the state that you want to meet. But, expecting obviously incredible activations from companies like Nova Farms, Cresco, Perpetual, Green Thumb, Select, Shaka, Kana. I've got the names go on and on and on, but
I didn't hear my brand Yellow Labs is going to be there with Electroleaf and ACM.
That's right.
We want to make sure we get a plug in for those guys as well, and they're looking forward to it. They will be out there. I will be at that booth. I'll also be live streaming right at 2:00 on Wednesday, which is the first day of the event, and I'm really looking forward to that as well. You also have some breakout sessions and some panels. People are actually coming in, and there's going to be an educational component to this too, correct?
Yeah, we're doing our most robust speaker panel ever this year. It's going to be 4 panels on each day, and actually it'll be kicked off with an incredible one-on-one with Chem Dog, who's the head grower over at Canna Provisions, who made the strain by the same name.
That's funny, and we all know that's a reference to a former late great Boston Red Sox Rem Dog, Jerry Remy. I don't know if you knew that, but that's definitely how that all evolved and everything. And I love the fact that Canna Provisions will be there as well. They were one. I think they are still the most successful dispensary in Massachusetts because of their beautiful location in Lee, and of course expanded past that now to other towns out in Western Mass. Northampton is really a haven for the cannabis community. There's 14 dispensaries out there. The mayor got rid of the horrible host community 3% tax that was put on every town in Massachusetts has it. There's only a couple that have waived it. In fact, I believe there's still a lawsuit going on about the actual legality of that. That being said, Northampton embraces the cannabis culture, and it will be on display at your event. It's going to be a highlight, if you will, of this year for sure.
Definitely, and we were talking about it earlier, but I think incredibly fitting to put the event there as well, because it's the most sales per capita in Massachusetts for cannabis.
There you go. So a good time will be had by all. There'll be business done. I'll be there. Jason will be there, and we look forward to seeing you there.
And finally today, there's a new report by the National Survey on Drug Use and Health that concludes that there is a gender gap among regular consumers' choice of consumption. One factoid that was released is that men enjoy smoking cannabis more than women. Females prefer other means of titration or consumption. The survey showed data that 19% of males prefer to smoke, while only 14% of females enjoyed that consumption method. When you look at beverages, tinctures, and edibles, women were twice as likely to prefer all of those methods over smoking. You can read what you want into the interpretation of the research data, okay? But as a female, it sure makes sense to me. That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto, and we want to remind you it's a whole new world of cannabis out there, so consume it responsibly, and we'll see you next time.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Debi Facey with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCM TV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.